Men going through challenges. Let's face it, we all, doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, you're going through some challenges or you will at some point. But this is for the men or the men in your life. And the big question is why men don't seek out help when they've got stuff going on. He helps men all the time. We're going to break all of this down today. He is a psychotherapist, a men's life coach, and he literally helps men get their spark back. Rolando Hyman joins us back here on the program today. Welcome. How are you doing today, Rolando?
I'm doing amazing, Steve. How about you?
I'm doing great, doing great. And I will admit, I didn't ask for help for the longest time. And then I started talking to, this is some years ago, but many different people that do what you do and even hypnotherapy and a lot of that to start a healing process, start to figure life out, start to feel better about myself. As we've talked before, a lot of this stuff goes back to our childhood or things that have happened, just life in general that kind of inspires us or charts the course for or life in the future. Uh,
Mm.
is it that men are just afraid to ask because they don't want to be judged?
100%, Steve. What I've learned, in my work with men going over a decade, closer to a decade and a half, is most men don't understand what it really looks like to come out of that false perception of safety, whereby
Hmm.
they believe that if I do expose myself, if I become vulnerable, then I'm going to not be accepted as a man, as an ideal man. I'm going to be seen as weak. I'm going to be seen as a pushover. I'm going to be seen as not who I'm supposed to be. So a lot of men fear all the stigma that comes around that. And so getting out and asking for help is oftentimes as they would say, the unforgivable.
It's truly a shame that men think that way, but I understand it because society placed it there in many regards for years. And somebody told me it was interesting also, relationships are challenging to navigate through because especially family dynamics. Because somebody said to me, back in the day, men didn't come home. I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They were out looking for dinner, even in prehistoric times. The DNA programmed them to fend for their family. They weren't spending family time at home. So, evolution wise, we look at now, and thankfully, men spend more time at home with their family, but doesn't mean they know how to do it, if
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, that's true, Steve. And sometimes the fear of failing at it
Mm.
cause a lot of men to stay away from engaging in that process itself. Dr. Martin Seligman, one of the fathers of positive psychology, he speaks about learned helplessness. And many of us as men, we have learned how to not expose ourselves to certain environments because it does not fit the status quo of what it looks like to be a man, which is why there are some men who they don't take the time to try to learn some of the domesticated stuff because they think it's the role of a female. All right. And so it's a challenge now. How do we bring those men closer home, literally, not just figuratively, helping him to understand that, hey, you are also needed at home. And, I'm forgetting the name of this guy, but, one of the things that he said is, and I'm quoting now, he said that a lot of men don't realize that they are as equally responsible for the emotional atmosphere of their homes as their partners. But as men, the emotional rather, intelligence is not where it ought to be. So we fear it, we avoid it like the plague. And so the change, Steve, is going to happen when as men we start facing some of those fears that we have and get more involved so that we can heal. And that's why, Steve, one thing that we promote is we talk about holistic healthy masculinity, where men are in touch with the feminine side of themselves, the nurturing side, the caring side, not just going out to hunt and bringing the meat, but
Mm.
also being at home to prepare the meat and to make sure that they are feeding the family, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically and spiritually.
I love it that you mentioned that many men have that fear of not doing it right. And what usually happens? They get withdrawn. They look unapproachable. They could even look a little grouchy and nasty. The typical picture of, oh, great, dad's coming home, look out. Well, maybe he doesn't want to, maybe he doesn't even know he's coming off that way to his family, but it all comes down to what you said. He doesn't know how to navigate it, so he doesn't want to fail at it. So then he just puts up the barriers, which isn't a good thing, but it is what it is.
Yes, Steve. Steve, another important piece, every man, we are challenged to adapt. So we talk about in psychology the law of adaptability, where as men, more of us, we've got to learn how to adapt. We've got to learn how to put ourselves in that space where we're vulnerable to say, hey, I don't know it. Can you show me? And sometimes in the home, because of the fear, and I've spoken to men who say, hey, I cannot let my partner see that vulnerable side of me because culturally it's not something that we do. And so he remains in that relationship, doesn't know how to do. Instead of saying he doesn't know how to do, he puts up a wall, a barrier. His partner is confused. But he's doing it because he fears that if he does anything different, his partner is going to see him as weak.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so we want to create what I refer to now, or rather, we want to seek to connect with couples and help even some of the partners of these men to not look at him through that lens of him failing or him being weak, but look at it through a lens of here's my partner. He is being vulnerable and open and honest with me. This is a teaching moment, a moment where, as a couple, we can grow together.
In those situations where a man is afraid to get emotional or afraid to just really, I'm in a men's group, and one of our standards, and we all agreed on what our standards are. One of them is mask down, among other things, but that's one of them.
Yeah.
Where you have to take the mask off and be who you are. Yes, it's not easy. How do you help men do that? How do you help them take their masks off?
You know, Steve, taking the mask off is easier said than done for most men because there are some men who all their lives, Steve, they have lived behind that mask. So in order to take that
Mm.
mask off, we have to first work with him to find out who he is without the mask. Because if a man cannot connect with his authentic self, okay, if a man cannot expose himself to experience a new reality, it's hard for the mask to come off. I'll give you an example. Dr. David McKellen of Harvard University, he said this. He said that the persons that we connect with the most or we hang out with the most are known as our influence group. And they determine 95% of our failure or successes in life.
Sure.
So imagine as men, we're connecting with other men who they themselves are living behind this mask. How do I step out of that group where I am accepted, where I feel loved? How do I step out of that group and say, hey, I'm going to remove the mask to see what that is like? There are some men who the trauma forbids them to remove that mask. Okay? The brokenheartedness forbids them to remove that mask. The betrayal forbids them to remove that mask. The psychological barriers forbids them to remove that mask. The substance dependency and alcohol, excessive alcohol use forbids them to remove that mask. So to remove that mask means to come out of that falsely created comfort zone and be willing to admit that I just don't have the answers. I'm at a roadblock and I need support.
Do you believe that most men don't even know who they are? They have the mask up. Of course, they're putting up the force field so nobody can see their vulnerability, but at the core, they're not even sure who they are.
A lot of us are not, Steve, sadly. And, a fun question, even as your listeners watch this, are watching this live or they watch it later, fun question is seek to answer this question: who am I? Who am I when I remove my professional hat? Who am I when I remove the mask that I've been wearing? Who am I when the stage light is not on me? When I'm backstage, who am I? When nobody is looking, what's my personality? What's my character? What's my reputation as a person? When I'm standing all by myself, who am I? And so a lot of us, we don't want to even explore that because as I go back to what I said, Seligman says we have created or this mindset. It's a learned helplessness. Cognitive behavioral therapy talks about our core belief. And if we have a core belief, Steve, that that's just who I am as a person, that sinks even deeper, which means we have to really be willing to engage in doing the work in order to break the cycle.
Do you feel the starting point to all of this might be to take some quiet time as a man and write down who you are or who you think you are? So now it's staring you in the face. So many of us are always thinking, but it's like a ping pong ball. It's bouncing all inside your head. You can't really get a true fix on it. To write
Mm-hmm.
it down, to see it,
Mm-hmm.
you're staring it. It came out of your hand, came out of your head down to your hand. And I mean, not type it, but write it.
Yeah.
As a starting point, do you think that would be impactful?
It's definitely a good start, because some of the experts out there, when you talk about guys like Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone, there are some guys out there who they do recommend the idea of practicing gratitude, where each day, for example, you would seek to start by writing, say two things that you're grateful for. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that we talk about also is seeking to challenge your thoughts by writing those thoughts out. Okay. And that way, Steve, you're able to take
Mm.
what's running around here and get a visual of it. And then you can start exploring where that came from and how do I change that? How do I transform that into something that's more empowering versus leaving it in the wind? So absolutely, it's a good first step. All right. But there's also that piece where I need to now be willing to accept my reality. I need to be willing to accept that, hey, this is who I am right now, but this is not who I want to be. There's got to be a difference. In my own life, Steve, I've had to come to grips with some of the things that I was exposed to as a young man. Okay, as I said in our first interview, I've had to literally, how do I say it, open myself up in order
Mm.
to receive. And that's the piece as men, we're so closed off. But if we start opening ourselves up just a little bit more, I'm not saying to jump off the deep end, but just start opening ourselves up by reaching out and seeking to see, hey, how do I do this? I can't do it on my own. How do I do it? It's a good first step.
Gratitude. You said that word before. I'm a big believer in it. I'm getting better at going to my gratitude journal on a more regular basis. I missed the weekend, but this morning I woke up and I'm like, I'm writing stuff down. And it doesn't have to be a lot. And I thought about it. What was I feeling good about this morning? And it's very
Mhm.
simple. This is, yeah, I write, I am grateful for, I put the date, I am grateful for. The first thing I wrote down, I thought about, I'm like, the warm weather. It got warmer here in the New York area today. Yesterday it started. Today it's much warmer. Like, I'm
Mhm.
grateful for that. That's great. I went for a walk. It felt great. And things like that.
Mhm.
Some people would say, come on, guys, writing stuff down you're grateful for, that's really going to make a big change in my life. Come on. Let's be
Yeah.
real. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you say to people that say that?
And it's funny, you asked a question, Steve. Research was done. Research was done. And in that research, one of the things that they asked men to do is for 30 days, I need you to think about writing down things that you're grateful for 30 days. And these are men who are going through a lot of psychological challenges.
Sure.
And so they went on this research, and all these men, they had a partner, and each day they would meet and they would just share, that experience for 30 days. And after 30 days, amazingly, the research discovered that their mindset shifted, their attitude, their outlook shifted. So it's almost as if practicing gratitude literally has the power to transform and change the mindset.
Hmm.
And sometimes, Steve, the critical piece in there is that we oftentimes want to look for a big thing. Hey, I'm grateful that I was able to collect my Ferrari today, right? Or I'm grateful that we went on this trip to Mexico, or we went backpacking around Europe or whatever, or I went to this big Grey Cup finals or whatever. But we're not taking the time to say, hey, you know what? I'm grateful. I have two arms and I have two legs. I'm grateful that my vision is still great. Look
Yep.
around us sometimes. And as
Yep.
men, if we practice that, Steve, it changes the entire structure of our brains, literally.
I'm glad we're talking about this. I think it's so powerful, and we forget about those little things. Yes, we're grateful for the big things, but what got us to the big things, like the vacation or whatever it is? Well, if you didn't have these two hands and two arms, you may not have been able to work to to gain some income that you can take that vacation. I've even I'm grateful for this cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I'll even boil it down to I'm grateful for the way it makes me feel. And
Hmm.
I feel that that's a missing part too. We don't put the way it makes us feel, which I'm guilty of that too. I need to include that sometimes. I like to keep it simple in my gratitude
Yeah.
journal, but how does it make you feel? Well, that cup of coffee is my little gift to me first thing in the morning. I don't do caffeine. I don't need it to wake up. It's it sets my day. But I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the barista
Hmm.
uh, where I bought it. I'm grateful for the people that grew the coffee beans. I'm grateful for the people that make the cup and all of that.
Hmm.
When you
Hmm.
think of those things, it does reshift your mind if you're always thinking in terms of being grateful.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And Steve, it's such a powerful thing when we are able to acknowledge, how we're feeling. And that's the next thing. As men, we're not oftentimes allowed to feel anything. So for a man to take the time to reflect, it means he has to slow down. It means he has to get in a safe space in his mind first to start connecting with that part of himself that he was detached from. And that's the thing why many of us as men, our mental health is not addressed. It's why we're not even okay to admit that our mental health is out of sync, because we don't allow ourselves to feel. We believe that if we feel, we're failing, right? But how do we not feel and still say we're humans? How do we have healthy relationships? And how do we connect with our partners if we're not feeling? It's got to go
Hmm.
beyond just adult activity and sexual intimacy. We have to be able to feel deeper than that if we're going to be healthy men in the community.
We're jumping down a rabbit hole. Here we go. Based on what you said, what if you're a man that's been hurt before and you've gotten to the point where you let things roll off, where
Mhm.
I'm not going to let it bother me anymore. I'm just, we're hypothetically thinking here. It's
Mhm.
almost like the dog got kicked a number of times. And let's say, this is a man who does show emotion, who is, plugged into his world. However,
Mhm.
things may have happened. And
Mhm.
now he says, I'm going to let it roll off my shoulder. I'm not going to let that hurt me. Somebody does something else to me. I'm not
Mhm.
letting that happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
Call
You
it
know,
desensitizing. I don't know what you want to call it, but yeah, please go.
but Steve, I love the question because here's how I respond to that, Steve. Not because it's all you know, it means it's all there is. And oftentimes, because of the experiences that we have had in the past, we tend to carry that weight with us from day to day, from relationship to relationship. And it makes it unfair to you and unfair to the other person. The reality is that not everyone is mature and understands how to function effectively in a relationship because hurt people. All right. But
Hmm.
there are those persons who are able to acknowledge that there are. So if a guy has been disappointed and hurt several times, it doesn't give him permit to not feel, to not love, to not connect, to not be vulnerable with someone else. He has to find a safe space, work on himself. And then he has to also recognize that not every woman that he meets or every person that he's interested in is going to be at that level where they are mature enough and intelligent enough to connect with you and provide that which you need. And that's why, Steve, we talk about relationship and relationship expectations, because oftentimes relationship expectations are not deep. They're quite surface. And when crisis comes, it ends because the relationship expectation was not clearly defined. And because I'm not allowing myself to feel anything, I'm going into this blind.
Hmm. If a man is using his force field and not wanting to get hurt, there are some that he gets close to. I'm not saying he's completely closed off. Is that him putting up his boundaries? Is that his terms? And is that reasonable? Is that okay? That's where I'm going with that. Where he's, been hurt. I'm not going to let that person, and that's a situation I'm not going to get involved in over there. I'm close to these people. I open up. Again, I'm painting a picture of this one particular man.
Mhm.
Um, but he's putting up boundaries. Is that normal? Is that okay? I shouldn't use the word normal. I take that back. As I'm saying, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Because what
Every
is normal?
relationship, Steve, needs to have some boundaries for sure.
Sure.
And there needs to be expectations. But what we've got to ask ourselves is if those boundaries are boundaries that is hindering me from going to the next level in my relationship, am I setting up boundaries that is harming me and the other person versus bringing us to a closer connection as a couple? Because there are boundaries that's based on because I was hurt already, I'm never ever going to open myself up to this space anymore in a relationship. So there
Yep.
is that consistent void. Now, if you're with someone who is emotionally intelligent and connected, they're going to pick that up early enough and say, hey, you know what, you're not ready. But as I said, hurt people hurt people. If you meet someone who is doing the same thing as you both will go into it, but it's going to be not a genuine space. It's not going to be a healthy relationship. Why? Because I'm closed off and you're closed off,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So we have got to know and understand that yes, boundaries need to be in the relationship, but if the boundary is based on a pain, if the boundary is based on a past experience, it's unfair to you and unfair to the other person if those boundaries are there because of that. You need to go work on yourself.
Hurt people, hurt people. If you got anything from today, remember that because it's so true. It is so true. Rolando, how do we connect with you? Man is hearing
Okay,
this.
great.
Maybe somebody's close to him. How do they
Mhm.
start the process for change?
Okay, so I now have a toll-free number, Steve. I have a toll-free number that you can call me at. It's 1-833-366-5724. That's 1-833-366-5727. Okay, you can call, you can text, and I always try to reach out back to persons within 24 hours. So I hope to hear from you guys soon.
Excellent. Always great talking with you. Thanks for really getting to the level where men can understand this. You have a great way of explaining things and where it feels safe. If we're getting that. It just feels safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
for being
Steve.
here, and we'll catch up next time.
Okay, Steve, have a great day, buddy.